Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to do a video by Extra History. This is over the 30 Years' War. This is part one of this series called Conquest. I have another 30 Years' War series that I'm going to get to as quickly as I can. It is from Kings and Generals, I believe. However, with me working and doing everything that I need to get the secondary movies and shows page up and running, I'm trying to find a quicker video to do, and the Kings and Generals one are pretty long. So I'm going to do this one. It's the 30 Years' War by Extra History. Let's go ahead and jump into it.
Prague, Kingdom of Bohemia, 1621. The axe falls, then falls again. Nobles die, knights are slain. Some have their hands chopped off, others are quartered and put on spikes. 27 leaders of the Bohemian Revolt, the Protestant uprising against the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II, die one after the other. Ferdinand, it is said, plans to dominate and recatholicize Bohemia. He's ordered all Protestants to convert or leave. Back on the street, a common woman watches the executions unfold, axes and swords falling again and again. Then she goes home, and trying to make sense of what she's seen, opens her Bible to the book of Revelation. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder. One of the four beasts saying, "Come and see." And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. She closes her book. This war, she knew, had only just begun. Thanks so much to HelloFresh for bringing this episode to the table. The 30 Years' War was one of the most destructive periods in all of European history. 3 decades of bloodletting, massacre, and death that would not be surpassed in body count until the trenches of World War I. And that's an incredible concept, considering that the armies that went to war between 1618 and 1648 had none of the mechanized instruments of slaughter available in the 20th century.
That's really what's crazy. This is one of the really interesting parts of history to me, is even going back to the first part where it talked about being drawn and quartered and having heads chopped off and things like that. This is extremely common throughout history, especially putting down rebellions. I mean, you see this, some of the absolute worst, horrific things you could ever think of basically is what happens anytime a group loses a rebellion historically. And it's why rebellions are so awesome to me, because they're not just putting like an idea on the line or something like that. They are literally putting everything on the line. You not only would be killed if you lost, but everybody you knew would be killed or sold into slavery or something of that sort. Your city would probably be burned. The earth would be salted so that nothing would grow there and nobody would come back. I mean, it's literally, you would just be demolished from the history books. And yet still you see these massive rebellions historically. And it's a really interesting concept to me of what's worth fighting for and how does that change over time. With this in particular, this is a huge stretch of time here between the 30 Years' War and World War I. The idea that the numbers are not going to be equal, the conflict is not going to be as bloody until World War I, is really an incredible thing. And it goes to show you how devastating this war was. And not just devastating, but 30 years. 30 years. You could have been fighting this war, get married, have a son, and your son could grow up and be fighting in this war. It's such a long time. It's kind of incredible.
This was a war of pike and shot, where men went to battle hefting bladed weapons, or muskets so heavy that they required a forked stand to rest them on. Yet even with just these crude implements, up to 8 million people lost their lives. The death toll, however, did not fall equally in all places. Kicked off by a political religious dispute in the Holy Roman Empire, the vast majority of the fighting took part in Central Europe, so the population there bore the heaviest share of the violence.
That does not do justice to what, I mean, that is the outline of the Holy Roman Empire, but that absolutely does not do justice to what it really looks like on the ground. I'll put a map up of what the Holy Roman Empire looked like at this time. It is a shit show.
Oh my God! Disgusting.
There, so hopefully you can get a little bit of a better idea of the reality of the situation, and how chaotic the different groups of people and everything like that were really on the ground.
In some areas, over half the population died, and the empire lost about 20% of its people. Civilian casualties outnumbered military deaths 7-1, and the Holy Roman Empire would take a century to recover its population. But describing in detail why this happened is difficult. In fact, we could spend an entire series just explaining why this war started, the early military campaigns, or how the Treaty of Westphalia ended it. Instead, we've decided to take a look at the 30 Years' War as a massive humanitarian crisis and explore why the body count reached such incredible heights. We'll look at factors like military violence and battles, but also starvation, poor harvests, weather conditions, and outbreaks of epidemic disease. And as a frame for all of this, we'll be using a device that many people in the worst affected lands turned to: apocalyptism. The four horse.
So, with regards to, disease outbreak and that sort of stuff, I've talked about this before, but I actually took a class on essentially historical pandemics and how they were handled and what happened and everything like that. And one of the things that, we saw really early on in the class, this was obviously a handful of years ago now, but one of the first things that we saw or learned was that these major outbreaks, they seemed to parallel wars. It wasn't something where it was coincidence. It was because of the conditions of the war that then the outbreaks would take place. And so, yeah, with long, prolonged, terrible conflicts, you're going to have outbreak of disease. And in a lot of cases, that can end up being as bad or worse than the actual conflict is.
Horsemen from the King James Bible, unleashed to scour a quarter of the earth, are an ideal way to divide the period's many dangers: conquest, war, famine, and death. And today, we'll be looking at the first: conquest. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in 1517, he not only sparked a religious reformation, he plunged Europe into what would become decades of religious war. Political units across the continent, from kingdoms like England and Bohemia down to levels of individual towns, broke out into struggles over both church doctrine and political power. And nowhere is this more true than the lands of the Holy Roman Empire, which quickly became a patchwork of majority Catholic and majority Lutheran provinces, towns, and cities. But war is a destructive and expensive endeavor, and by 1555, pretty much everyone was sick of it. So that year, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, part of the Habsburg family that had a lock on the position of emperor, signed a treaty with a league of Lutheran princes in Augsburg, Germany. The Peace of Augsburg had a single idea at its heart, expressed by the phrase, "whose realm, his religion." Meaning, essentially, the prince of a realm, whatever its size, could decide whether to be Catholic or Lutheran and enforce that religious conformity on his territory. Those that did not wish to convert would then move to an area whose prince practiced their chosen faith. And for a while, the Peace of Augsburg worked pretty well. The key words, of course, being "for a while." See, the Holy Roman Empire was a patchwork anyway, comprised of not big provinces, but estates. Some only a few square miles, and not even continuous, where the head authority was a prince, though in reality, these princes could be lords, counts, bishops, knights, abbots, or even a representative of a free city. Each of these had a vote at the imperial diet and was semi-autonomous. Then the emperors were elected by 7 elector princes, and as a result, had very little direct control over lands in the empire unless their family personally governed them. So, whose realm, his religion, was a fitting solution for this decentralized empire. And on a day-to-day basis,
Yeah, and so this is working more or less like a confederation. The issue with confederations in general, at least the issues that have, befallen them up to this point in history, is it's really hard to get anybody to do what you want them to. Like, something that might be beneficial for the larger group may not be super beneficial to individual players in that group. And so then what happens is you have individual players that really don't want to go along with this. So what happens? Either they don't, and there's nothing that the bigger group can really do. And over time, that sort of breaks down, it builds resentment. Something's got to give, essentially. On the other side, if you have a bigger group or kind of overseer here with obviously the king in this case, then if he has an iron fist and can hold everybody in line, it can work. Everybody may hate it, but it can at least for a time work. We've seen this over and over again. That also, however, builds resentments, and you're going to have rebellions, and you're going to have to be even more harsh to put those out. And so it's just really hard to keep one of these kind of like wrangled and tied together. And again, remember the map. Like, this is not three, four different areas or territories that are trying to come together and hash out agreements. It's an extreme patchwork of all of these different places, all of these different people, just trying to come up with something that will divert conflict, that will let people practice the religion that they want. But again, there's so many rubs here that you're going to have issues.
This, German Lutherans and Catholics became pretty used to each other. In fact, evidence indicates up to 20% of marriages crossed that theological division. Things were stable.
Damn.
Not without tension or danger, but people were able to navigate the chasm in their daily lives. But the Peace of Augsburg did leave out a Protestant group that even the Lutherans considered heretics: Calvinists, who, among other theological differences with Lutherans, argued that Jesus was only spiritually present in the bread and wine served during communion. Because Calvinists were not included in the Peace of Augsburg, they had no religious protections, even when under a Lutheran ruler, meaning their safety hinged on whoever was in charge and how lenient they were, which is how things kicked off in Bohemia in 1618. For nearly a decade, the Holy Roman Emperors had expanded Protestant rights in Bohemia. This included a pragmatic decree called the Letter of Majesty, granting religious freedom to the Bohemian estates and letting Bohemians develop what amounted to a state church. But in 1617, Holy Roman Emperor Matthias was sickly and childless, wanting to solve his succession issue before he passed on. So, he got the Bohemian estates, which voted on their kings, to elect his cousin Ferdinand II as the next king of Bohemia after he died. Which was a problem, since it was well known that Ferdinand was a hardline Catholic who wanted to eradicate Protestantism within the empire. And once Ferdinand had gotten enough Lutheran princes on his side to win, the Calvinists were terrified. After all, Emperor Matthias was sick, and when he died, Ferdinand would not only become the King of Bohemia, he would also almost certainly be elected as Holy Roman Emperor. He'd lead the whole empire and also govern Bohemia directly. And that's when it all went out the window, literally. Because when Ferdinand sent a pair of hardline Catholic governors to administer Bohemia in his absence, a group of Bohemian Protestants met them at Prague Castle. After the pair read aloud a threatening letter from Ferdinand, the assembled Protestant nobles responded by throwing the pair out the window. Now, what happened next depends on who you believe. Catholic propagandists say that angels swept down to catch the governors, while Protestants said the men survived because they fell in a giant pile of dung. And then we have historians pointing out that they landed on a gradual slope and broke a lot of bones. With this second defenestration of Prague, that being a fancy word for throwing someone out a window, and yeah, this was the second time it happened, the 30 Years' War began. The revolt spread across Bohemia, which was already primed for religious war, and it might have stayed a local conflict, except that Matthias died, and Frederick did succeed him as Holy Roman Emperor, causing panic amongst other Protestants in the empire. Then,
Did they just say Frederick there? Which Is that did I mishear it or did they say Frederick? It's Ferdinand, right? Ferdinand the second? Is that am I losing my mind?
Sides formed. Austrian Protestants joined the rising, as did some in Germany. Bohemia attempted to join the Protestant Union, a group of Protestant estates in the empire that formed as a sort of mutual defense pact, and invited the Calvinist elector prince, Frederick V, to be king of Bohemia. Ferdinand, by turn, called in military aid from his cousin Philip II, the king of Spain, forming the Catholic League. This Catholic
God, I'm going to play EU4 as soon as I'm done recording this.
League marched on Austria, one of their armies headed by the Count of Tilly, a brilliant but ruthless commander. Then, on November 8th, 1620, 27,000 Catholic troops stood outside Prague, the only thing in their way being 15,000 Bohemians on a low rise called White Mountain. The Bohemians crumpled, a flank attack sending their first units into retreat. Many rebels, seeing their fellows running, joined the rout without firing a shot. Then the Imperial cavalry surrounded and massacred them. 4,000 dead in an hour. Ferdinand had entered Prague as a conqueror, and the Habsburgs would personally govern Bohemia for the next 300 years. A few months later, the axes raised and fell on the rebel leaders. Frederick V went into exile, and the man who welcomed him to Prague had his tongue nailed to the city gate. But Ferdinand had pushed too far, and this would not stay a small regional conflict. For the second horseman was on his way to take peace from the earth. War. Oh boy, Zoe, there is no way we are tackling another horseman of the apocalypse on an empty stomach. Ooh, you know what we need? Haha, you're ready.
Okay, so that was the 30 Years War by Extra History, the #1 Conquest. I will get the next part out as soon as I can. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here, and I will see you all next time.